Good afternoon. On September 11, 2001, we watched in horror as coverage of the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and Flight 93 unfolded on local and national television. The jets flying into the towers collapsing, the rubble spewing and dust everywhere, and the incomprehensible bravery of firefighters, police, paramedics, and other first responders rushing into harm's way as everyone else scrambled to escape. Those images on our TVs, that type of news coverage does not happen on its own. Reporting the news can be extremely dangerous. So dangerous that since 2006, more than 400 journalists have lost their lives covering the news worldwide. You see, journalists are also first responders, a different kind of community servant. Reporters, correspondents, producers, photographers, and videographers risk their lives to tell us, the rest of us, what is happening around the world. Our keynote speaker today, N.J. Burkett of WABC-TV's Eyewitness News, is one of those correspondents. N.J. has covered the war in Iraq in 2003, the terrorist bombings in Madrid in 2004 and in London in 2005, the war between Israel and Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, and the war in the Gaza Strip between Israel and Hamas. And on September 11, 2001, NJ and his WABC-TV photographer Marty Glembotsky were covering the attack on the World Trade Center when they narrowly escaped the collapsing tower on the South Tower. Their work was later seen on television news broadcasts across the nation and around the world and is on permanent exhibit at the museum in Washington, D.C. You can also find it at 7online.com or on YouTube. It is some of the most compelling reporting and video you will ever see. We are extremely honored that NJ has agreed to be our keynote speaker today. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome N.J. Burkett.
Well, Bob, I am very humbled by that and really honored to be here. I'm especially thrilled to see the Scouts and so many young people who are here today, because a big part of why we're doing this is about them. Because I think that fundamentally we want their understanding of what happened on 9/11 to be just as vivid as our memories as adults. I am here with you today because there was a door. What if the door was locked? What if there was no door? What if I had to run for half a block? What if? It is a question that I've been asking myself for 11 years. I don't have to close my eyes to remember any of it. The jets had just struck the towers, and now I am dodging aircraft parts and flying glass after racing 80 blocks from the Channel 7 newsroom on the Upper West Side with my photographer, Marty Glembotsky. Now, Marty and I discussed this on the way down. It was our original plan to get inside the buildings with the firefighters to tell their story. But with all of the falling debris, as you can imagine, it's too dangerous. We could not get close to the concourse. So we back off. We retreat to West Street, where the city's fire commanders have established a command post. Legions of firefighters are now standing like soldiers ready for battle, their eyes fixated on the burning towers. One has his hand on his heart. Another presses his hands together, and I realize he's praying. Marty focuses his zoom lens on the top of the North Tower, where he can clearly see people hanging from the windows to escape the smoke and flames on the upper floors. They're jumping, he says to me. And now neither of us can look. The towers are burning. Untold numbers of people are trapped, unable to escape. And you just knew that the firefighters would be unable to reach those people. What, I ask myself, could be worse than that? I look around and I realize now we're the only television crew that's gotten this close. I decide I'm going to explain some of what's happening on camera. So I tell Marty, start with me, Marty, show the firefighters, then tilt up to show the towers. Even if it were not on videotape, I'm going to remember what happens next for the rest of my life. As Marty tilts up, there is this deafening rumble from above. The South Tower is collapsing in a thunderous cascade of cement, glass, and steel, and it is all happening on camera. A huge explosion now raining debris on all of us. We better get out of the way. That's what I shouted into the microphone. We had maybe 4 or 5 seconds before everything is going to start hitting the ground. Instinctively, I remember there's an office tower behind me. So I turn around to seek refuge there, and there is the door. We ran inside the American Express building as the South Tower landed in a cloud of dust just outside. There were others, we later learned, who never made it through the door. And as many of you know, the city's top uniformed fire commanders were among the 343 firefighters that were killed that day. There is nothing quite like hearing your own father cry. Like millions of other Americans, he watched on live television as the South Tower collapsed, followed by the North Tower. Marty and I had narrowly escaped both, but I had no way of telling anybody for nearly an hour. Most of the cell sites were down and our cell phones didn't work. When I finally reached a working telephone, we could barely speak to one another. "I'm fine," I told him over and over again. "Dad, I'm fine. I'm okay." Am I okay? Really? 11 years later, the answer is not so simple. Yes, I made it through the door, but what about the others? Hardly a day passes when I don't think about them and their families. There were police officers and firefighters that I knew personally from years on the job. My high school classmate and good friend from Elizabeth, New Jersey, Carlos DaCosta, who worked for the Port Authority and worked on the upper floors. And a coworker, Don DeFranco, who is maintaining the Channel 7 transmitter on the North Tower the day it was struck. Somehow, like everyone else, I got through the days that followed. My case logging long hours on the air and sleeping for a few hours every night in the Channel 7 satellite truck, just a couple blocks from this place that they started calling Ground Zero. When I finally made it home 4 days later to Long Island, where I live, all I wanted to do was to see my family and switch off this nightmare that was running through my head. After a long embrace, I said to my wife, "Where's Jay?" Jay's my son, who is almost 4 years old at the time. "He's upstairs in his room," she says. So I climbed the stairs and I stepped into Jay's room. My guard at this point is now totally down. And I was totally unprepared for what I was about to see. "Hey, pal," I said. "What are you up to?" "Hi, Dad," he said with a big smile. He was sitting on the floor where he had built 2 huge towers with his blocks and was slamming a plane into them. "Jay," I asked, "what's happening?" "The plane is crashing, Dad," he said. "But Jay, what about the people? Aren't they getting hurt?" "Oh, no, Dad," he told me, as a 4-year-old would say. "There's nobody in the buildings, and the plane is flying all by itself." Six months later, I'm standing in Battery Park, assigned to interview relatives of the victims. One man tells me the story of his middle-aged son, who was about my age, but had never once set foot in the World Trade Center until September 11th, where he had a breakfast meeting at Windows on the World. The irony of that story, and there are so many others, the irony of that story, guy my age, fate, twist of fate, I mean, that just shook me to the core, and I broke down, unable to continue interviewing people. And suddenly, the relatives of the victims I was supposed to be interviewing were consoling me. 2 years later, I'm in Kuwait City dodging missile strikes from Saddam Hussein after the U.S. launched its invasion of Iraq. A year after that, I'm in Madrid where al-Qaeda sympathizers had bombed the commuter rail lines. And then in Great Britain, 1 year after that, where other al-Qaeda sympathizers bombed the London Underground. And as we all know, then came the plots in this country, aborted and foiled, the raids, the arrests, the terror trials. So yes, somehow I was fortunate enough to run through that door and into the rest of my life. But haven't we all passed through the door and into our lives post 9/11? Because no matter where you were and what you were doing on that day, we are, all of us, survivors of September 11th. So how have you come out of it? Has it made you bitter, angry, even paranoid? I hope not, because there are some very bizarre people who have some very bizarre theories about September 11th. If you run my name and 9/11 through Google, you can actually find articles and blog posts from people who believe that I was an accomplice to one of the greatest hoaxes in the history of American media. The fact that I use the word explosion to describe the collapse of the South Tower has made me something of a poster boy for conspiracy theorists. There are those people that believe that the images of desperate people on the upper floors that Marty was able to see with his zoom lens were mannequins. This stuff is on the internet. That the dust-covered survivors that I interviewed were actors and actresses, and bad ones at that. And that maybe we weren't even there at all. That I was in a studio and the burning towers were projected behind me in some elaborate green screen effect. One man actually wrote this. He works for ABC. ABC is owned by Disney, and who does animation better than Disney? So yes, a part of me wants to laugh, but another part of me wants to put a fist through somebody's face. Maybe you would feel the same way. We have been on the other side of the door for 11 years. There is this impulse, maybe we all have it, an impulse to forget what happened, to avoid thinking about it or talking about it. It is emotional self-preservation. Let's face it. And I don't know about you, but I struggle with that. For the 10th anniversary of 9/11, I wrote an op-ed piece for the largest daily newspaper in Israel. They're 7 hours ahead, so I sent it to them well before the morning of 9/11. Then I spent the entire day entertaining really good friends from Australia, miles and miles away from Ground Zero. I turned down just about every interview request I got, and I asked to have the day off. That was my way of coping on the 10th anniversary of 9/11. But this year, I'm here with you, spending the day away from my family, actually talking about 9/11, which I really don't like to do. And no, it's not easy. But I'm here because it's necessary. It's necessary for all of us who made it through the door to talk about the journey, painful as it's been, so it is thoroughly understood by the future generations. You know, I was extremely fortunate this past week to have been given a tour of number 1 World Trade Center. It takes about 15 minutes in a rickety work elevator to reach the 102nd floor. I did that. You know, the upper floors are not even enclosed yet, just a few steel cables and some plastic netting to keep you off the edge. I stood there 6 inches from the edge, staring into the distance. Not just miles, but years, my friends. After several minutes, one of the workers approached me and handed me a white marker. Here, Mr. Burkett, find a beam and sign it. So there, on the 102nd floor, at the edge of what will be a spectacular new observation deck, there is a beam that reads, "We must always remember what happened here." It is an honor to have done that, and it was an honor to be here with all of you this afternoon. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you. That means a great deal to me.